Why certain relationships work like emotional poison. Have you ever felt like you're drowning in quicksand, and the more you struggle, the deeper you sink? That suffocating sensation where no matter what you do, it's never enough, never right, never acceptable. That's not bad luck. That's psychological warfare disguised as intimacy. It's a form of modern alchemy where your sanity is the raw material being transmuted into someone else's power. History is filled with people who understood the dark art of control. Take Marquis de Sade, the 18th century French nobleman whose name became synonymous with cruelty. He didn't just inflict physical pain, he engineered psychological dependency, making his victims question their own perception of right and wrong. Sound familiar? That's because toxic relationships operate on the same blueprint: confusion, control, and the systematic dismantling of your internal compass. The 48th law of power states, assume formlessness. And that's exactly what a manipulator does. They're shapeshifters, adapting their persona to whatever gets them control. One moment, they're your soulmate. The next, they're a stranger. One day, they worship you. The next, they tear you down. This isn't inconsistency, it's strategy. It keeps you off balance, always guessing, always trying to figure out which version is the real one. Here's the disturbing truth. Your brain is hardwired to seek patterns and predictability. When you encounter unpredictability in someone you're bonded with, your nervous system goes into overdrive trying to solve the puzzle. It's like a slot machine. Those intermittent rewards keep you pulling the lever, convinced that the next pull will be the jackpot. Neuroscience calls this intermittent reinforcement. Casinos call it profit, and toxic partners call it Tuesday. The cycle is mathematically precise. Idealization, devaluation, discard, hoover, repeat. During idealization, you're placed on a pedestal so high you get altitude sickness. They love bomb you with attention, affection, and promises of forever. Your brain floods with dopamine and oxytocin. You feel seen, understood, cherished. Then comes devaluation, where that same person treats you like you're worthless. The contrast is so extreme your brain can't process it, so it assumes you did something wrong. What makes this particularly insidious is something called cognitive dissonance. When reality contradicts your beliefs, your mind experiences psychological discomfort. So instead of accepting that this person is toxic, your brain rewrites the narrative. Maybe you're too sensitive, maybe you misunderstood, maybe you provoked it. You become your own prosecutor, building the case against yourself. There's a reason interrogation techniques used by intelligence agencies mirror tactics in abusive relationships: sleep deprivation, emotional flooding, unpredictable kindness, followed by cruelty, isolation from support systems. These methods break down psychological resistance, and just like a prisoner of war, you eventually start cooperating with your captor, not because you want to, but because your survival mechanisms kick in. Here's your first powerful practical action. Map the emotional temperature of your relationship over the past month. Create a simple chart with days of the week and rate your emotional state from 1 to 10. If you see a roller coaster pattern with extreme highs and devastating lows, you're not in a relationship, you're in a psychological experiment where you're the lab rat. The most dangerous part, you start to believe that this chaos is passion, that this instability is intensity, that this suffering is proof of deep connection. It's not. It's poison wrapped in pretty paper. If you've ever found yourself making excuses for inexcusable behavior, if you've ever felt crazy for having normal emotional needs, write in the comments. Awaken. That word is your first act of rebellion against the toxic alchemy. And if this content is hitting close to home, leave a like and subscribe to the channel, because we're just getting started on exposing the mechanics of emotional manipulation, how manipulators weaponize your own mind against you. There's a dark secret about human psychology that predators understand instinctively. Your greatest strength can become your greatest weakness. Empathy, loyalty, the desire to see the best in people. These beautiful human qualities become weapons in the hands of someone who knows how to exploit them. And the most terrifying part, they don't need a psychology degree to do it. They just need to be willing to do what decent people aren't. Let's talk about a phenomenon that psychiatrists documented during the Korean War. American POWs were subjected to something called ideological remodeling, no physical torture, just psychological manipulation. Captors would get prisoners to make small concessions, tiny admissions of fault, minor criticisms of their own country. Each concession made the next one easier. Eventually, some prisoners were making propaganda broadcasts, genuinely believing what they were saying. The technique? Incremental manipulation of identity. Sound extreme? It's happening in toxic relationships every single day. It starts small. You're a bit too sensitive. Then, your friends don't really get you. Then, your family never supported you anyway. Then, I'm the only one who truly understands you. Before you know it, your entire identity has been reconstructed around their narrative, and you don't even remember who you were before. Law 32 of Power warns us: play to people's fantasies. The manipulator sells you a dream version of the relationship that never quite materializes, but is always just around the corner. Once we move in together, everything will be perfect. After I get that promotion, I'll have more time for us. When you stop doing X, I'll finally be happy. The goalpost keeps moving, and you keep chasing, exhausted and confused about why you can never reach it. Here's where it gets diabolical: projection. The manipulator accuses you of exactly what they're doing. They're cheating, so they accuse you of infidelity. They're lying, so they call you dishonest. They're manipulative, so they claim you're controlling. This serves two purposes. It deflects attention from their behavior, and it makes you so busy defending yourself that you never have time to examine their actions. There was a Soviet propaganda technique called reflexive control, developed during the Cold War. The idea was to feed your opponent so much contradictory information that they become paralyzed by confusion, unable to determine what's real. That's what happens when you're constantly told your memories are wrong, your feelings are invalid, and your perceptions are distorted. You enter a fog where up is down, wrong is right, and abuse is love. Your hippocampus, the brain region responsible for memory formation, actually shrinks under chronic stress and gaslighting. MRI studies show measurable changes in brain structure for people in long-term toxic relationships. You're not imagining that you can't think straight anymore. Your cognitive function is literally being compromised by sustained psychological assault. And then there's the isolation playbook. First, they create conflict between you and your support system. Your best friend is jealous of what we have. Your sister never liked me anyway. Your coworkers are a bad influence. Then they position themselves as your only ally in a hostile world. Once you're isolated, they have complete control over your reality because there's no outside perspective to challenge their narrative. Consider the case of Patty Hearst in 1974, kidnapped heiress who, after weeks of isolation and psychological manipulation, joined her captor's cause and participated in armed robbery. Experts called it Stockholm Syndrome, but it's really about what happens when someone has total control over your environment, your information, and your emotional state. You begin to adopt their worldview as a survival mechanism. Here's your second powerful practical action. Conduct outside perspective test. Record yourself explaining your relationship situation to an imaginary stranger, as if they knew nothing about you or your partner. Listen back to that recording. Often, hearing your own words from an external viewpoint reveals patterns you've been rationalizing away. Would you want someone you love to be in the relationship you just described? The weapon they're using against you is your own mind. They've turned your empathy into a liability, your love into a cage, and your hope into handcuffs. If you've ever felt like you're losing your grip on reality, if you've questioned your own sanity while defending theirs, write in the comments, clarity. That word is your declaration that you're starting to see through the smoke and mirrors. Hit that like button if this is uncomfortable truth you needed to hear, and subscribe because we're about to reveal why you become an accomplice to your own destruction. Why you become the architect of your own prison. Here's the part that nobody wants to admit, the truth that feels like swallowing glass. At some point, you stop being just a victim and become a collaborator. Not because you're weak, not because you're stupid, but because the manipulation has become so sophisticated that your own defense mechanisms are now working against you. You've been psychologically hijacked, and the hijacker is using your autopilot to fly you straight into the ground. Let me tell you about learned helplessness, a concept accidentally discovered by psychologist Martin Seligman in 1967. He was studying dogs and classical conditioning, but he stumbled onto something darker. When dogs were subjected to unavoidable shocks, they eventually stopped trying to escape, even when escape became possible. They had learned that their actions didn't matter. They just lay down and accepted the pain. That's what happens to you. Your brain calculates that resistance is futile, so it stops resisting. But there's another layer. You're not just giving up. You're actively defending your captor. There's a case from 1933 involving a woman named Mary Mallon, better known as Typhoid Mary. She was an asymptomatic carrier of typhoid fever who refused to believe she was making people sick. She fought authorities, fled quarantine, changed her identity to keep working as a cook. She infected dozens, killed several, all while genuinely believing she was the victim. Sometimes, we become so invested in our version of reality that we'll burn the world down rather than admit we were wrong. Law 39 of power teaches, stir up waters to catch fish. But in toxic relationships, you're not the fisherman, you're the fish. The manipulator keeps the waters perpetually disturbed, so you're always in reactive mode, never able to think clearly or plan strategically. You're too busy surviving the current crisis to notice you're swimming in a tank, not an ocean. The sunk cost fallacy is economics, but it's also your emotional prison. You've invested 3 years, 5 years, a decade. You've sacrificed friendships, career opportunities, pieces of yourself. Walking away means admitting all that investment was wasted. So you invest more, hoping to eventually break even, realizing that you're throwing good money after bad, good years after bad years, good mental health after already destroyed mental health. There's something called identification with the aggressor, a defense mechanism first described by Anna Freud. When faced with an overwhelming threat you can't escape, you psychologically merge with the threatening figure. You start to see things from their perspective, adopt their values, defend their actions. It's why hostages defend kidnappers, why cult members attack defectors, and why you find yourself explaining to concerned friends why your partner's behavior is actually reasonable if you just understand their childhood trauma. Consider the Stanford prison experiment from 1971. Conducted by Philip Zimbardo. College students were randomly assigned to be guards or prisoners in a simulated jail. Within days, the guards became sadistic and the prisoners became passive and depressed. The experiment had to be shut down early because people so fully inhabited their roles that psychological damage was occurring. You've been assigned the role of prisoner in a 2-person experiment, and you've inhabited that role so completely you've forgotten it's not your true identity. Your brain craves narrative coherence. When your lived experience contradicts your self-image as someone who has good judgment and wouldn't tolerate abuse, your brain has 2 options: admit you've been fooled, or rewrite the story so you're not the fool. Most people choose option 2. He only acts like that because he loves me so much. She's just passionate. The good times outweigh the bad. These aren't observations. They're creative fiction designed to protect your ego from a devastating truth. Here's your 3rd powerful practical action. Write 2 letters. First, write a letter to yourself from the perspective of your best friend, describing your relationship honestly. Second, write a letter to your past self from 5 years ago, explaining where you are now and how you got here. The dissonance between who you were and who you've become will be stark. That dissonance is the crack where light can enter. You've become the guard of your own cell, and the most tragic part is you think you're protecting something valuable inside. You're not. You're protecting your abuser from accountability. If you've recognized yourself as your own jailer, if you've caught yourself defending the indefensible, if you've attacked people who tried to help you escape, write in the comments, freedom. That word is the key you've been holding all along, but were too afraid to use. Leave a like if this is the wake-up call you've been avoiding, and subscribe to the channel, because the final piece is about to reveal how you break the chains you forged yourself, how to shatter the illusion and reclaim your reality. Escaping a toxic relationship isn't like walking through a door, It's like defusing a bomb while the manipulator keeps cutting wires and telling you which color to choose. Every cell in your body screams danger, but your rewired brain whispers that leaving is the real threat. This is the final test. Can you trust yourself more than you trust the person who systematically taught you not to trust yourself? Here's what they don't tell you about leaving. The manipulator has already wargamed your exit strategy. They've installed psychological tripwires that detonate the moment you try to escape. Suddenly, they're the person you fell in love with again. Suddenly, they're getting therapy, reading self-help books, promising real change this time. Or they flip the script entirely. Threats of self-harm, financial ruin, custody battles, public humiliation. Whatever your specific vulnerability is, they'll exploit it. Count on it. There's a dark historical parallel in the story of Jonestown, but let's look at something less known. The Emter Rebellion of 1534. An entire city fell under the control of radical leaders who convinced thousands of people that suffering and sacrifice were paths to paradise. Those who tried to leave were labeled traitors and enemies. By the time people realized the paradise was a delusion, they were too committed, too afraid, too broken to escape. The city had to be liberated by outside force, because the prisoners couldn't free themselves. Law 4 of Power advises, always say less than necessary. But for you, the opposite is true. You need to speak your reality into existence. Silence has been your enemy. Every time you didn't tell someone what was really happening, every time you minimized the abuse to avoid judgment, every time you kept the secret to protect your partner's reputation, you strengthened the walls of your prison. The neuroscience of recovery is brutal and beautiful. Your amygdala has been in constant fight or flight mode for so long that peace will initially feel dangerous. Your nervous system has adapted to chaos as baseline normal, so calm will trigger anxiety. This isn't failure, it's withdrawal. You're detoxing from trauma. And just like any addiction, the chemical dependency is real. Your brain literally became addicted to the cortisol and adrenaline cocktail of toxic love. But here's the secret weapon nobody talks about: spite. Not the toxic kind, but the fuel kind. When love won't get you out, when self-respect seems too damaged to access, when hope feels naive, spite can be rocket fuel. The sheer determination to prove that you're stronger than their manipulation, that you won't be another cautionary tale, that you refuse to give them the satisfaction of destroying you completely. Use it. Look at Harriet Tubman, who escaped slavery in 1849 and then returned to the South 19 times to lead others to freedom. She operated in constant danger, but she had something more powerful than fear: conviction. She knew the difference between captivity and freedom, and once you've tasted real freedom, even the memory of it becomes a compass pointing north. Here's your fourth and final powerful practical action: create an escape document. In a secure location they don't know about, write down every incident of abuse with dates. Screenshot threatening messages. Record your observations, not for legal purposes necessarily, but because when they hoover you back with charm and promises, when your traumatized brain starts rewriting history again, you'll have evidence. You'll have proof that you're not crazy, you're not overreacting, and you're not safe. The illusion only works if you keep believing in it. The moment you see the strings, the puppeteer loses power. And here's what they're terrified you'll discover: you were never powerless. You were conditioned to forget your power. There's a difference. One is permanent, the other is reversible. Breaking free isn't a single moment. It's a series of unglamorous, terrifying, lonely decisions made over and over, until one day you realize you haven't thought about them in hours, then days, then weeks. Recovery isn't linear, but it's possible. The version of you that existed before this relationship, that person is gone. But the version emerging from the ashes is forged in fire, immune to manipulation, allergic to bullshit, and absolutely unbreakable. You don't need to be healed to leave. You don't need to be strong. You just need to be willing to trade a familiar hell for an uncertain freedom. And on the other side of that trade is a life where you're not constantly holding your breath, where peace isn't a temporary ceasefire, where love doesn't leave bruises on your soul. If you're ready to shatter the illusion, if you're ready to stop being a character in their story and start writing your own, write in the comments, unbreakable. That word is your contract with the future version of yourself who made it out. Leave a like if this message reached you at exactly the moment you needed it. Subscribe to this channel to continue deprogramming from manipulation, and share this video with someone who might be trapped in their own beautiful nightmare. Sometimes the right words at the right time can save a life. Maybe yours, maybe theirs.